May I again request speakers of the session to please join us on the dais. The session before the tea break, and then we resume the session after the tea break. Those speakers can join us later.
Shall I start? Let's briefly introduce the pardon? I will briefly introduce the speaker. You can do it. You want to make the opening statement? No, you introduce already. Okay. It's my pleasure to open this session, and I must say that I've been very proactive in interacting and interfacing with the homeopathic industry partners to prepare this session, and I was truly pleasantly surprised to see how much enthusiasm there was to have a discussion of this nature. And I think, generally speaking, the fact that delegates from all over the different industries in Europe and the United States are here, I think in itself is already a testimony and an appreciation of what we're trying to do here. So, yes, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the first speaker, and that's Irène Chetcuti. She's from Varon, and she's the head of regulatory affairs of Varon, and she has even some roots in Holland. And she was a pharmacist at the University of Strasbourg, and she worked for 10 years for Weleda, and since 1999 for Baron. And so I really look forward to hearing her experience. Baron, as a global company, is present in probably the most countries of the world of any pharmaceutical company. So I think it's we're very pleased for you to be here to share your perspectives.
How do we go from one to the other? This one? Excuse me? This one? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Robert, for this introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to be a speaker in this forum, which is a highly interesting forum and provides a unique and first in my career opportunity to understand the different regulatory frameworks existing all around the world, really global. Well, dear regulators, dear colleagues, dear friends of homeopathy, it is very impressive to see you here, so many, and it is a very great pleasure for me to see again those with whom I have so often collaborated and discussed these subjects all the time. I am particularly grateful to the representatives of the agencies for all the efforts they have provided in order to reach the objective of bringing homeopathic medicinal products into a suitable and stable pharmaceutical regulatory frame. Regulation of homeopathic medicinal products is the subject that has occupied almost my entire career. This is why I'm very proud to share with you today a certain number of the questionings and experiences that have marked these many years of regulatory affairs for my company, Baron. Yes, there are big differences between countries, and it may seem sometimes difficult to understand the reasons for the differences. In many countries, in order to put a homeopathic medicinal product on the market, a company must first submit an application to the drug agency supported by a full CTD documentation, including a complete 5-year stability test, ICH compliant. And we can expect the approval in an unpredictable time, reaching as much as 18 years, at least for one of our experiences. In other countries, a company just needs to declare to the drug agency the commercialization of a homeopathic drug product, simultaneously to its commercial launch, provided it is consistent with official pharmacopoeias, provided the manufacturer is totally GMP compliant. This means that the manufacturing procedures have been pharmaceutically validated, etc. In some circles, homeopathic drug products seem to be considered as extremely dangerous products, and in other circles, they are considered as perhaps even devoid of any effect at all. Well, we here believe that homeopathic medicinal products or drug products, it's the same for me, contribute to improve public health. They play an increasing role in healthcare systems. We believe that the more the public will have access to homeopathic medicinal products in pharmacies and stores for self-diagnosed conditions that do not need the supervision of a doctor, and the more they will get familiar with homeopathy, the more they will tend to consult homeopathic doctors afterwards and health practitioners for serious ailments and for individual homeopathic treatment. Therefore, the use, the visibility, the access of the public to homeopathic medicinal products should be developed and facilitated. And this access should be ensured through existing distribution channels. Advertising should be allowed for homeopathic medicinal products. Brand names should be allowed. Labeling requirements should allow the provision of useful information, such as consumer-friendly wording and an attractive layout. Well, I would like to develop in the 20 minutes of this presentation some major aspects that have been particularly striking to me, and I would like to show, I hope, how much work sharing should be further developed, relying on each other's evaluation procedure and avoiding duplicating evaluations. With the help of the recently published WHO document, it's a draft document, but nevertheless, I thought it would be helpful for this presentation. I will illustrate some domains with a few examples of good regulatory practice, maybe less good regulatory practice that could change. The first one is the legality. I would just like to quote the WHO draft text. It's written here: the regulatory decisions must be founded on valid legal authorities respecting the rule of law. The national regulatory authorities must have the resources and powers to accomplish the duties and take timely actions. Regulatory convergence is desirable at both national and international levels. Well, I would like to make a remark about the European directive. It represents to me the most recent regulatory tool applicable in such a large number of states. It has proven very useful to bring regulatory convergence within the 28 member states of the European Union. Yet, 25 years after its publication, its practical implementation is far from achieved in all member states. Well, I think one has not even begun, which puts the companies in a challenging situation. The full up-to-date CTD documentation is required in a very short time, each time a member state starts the review. With the rapid changes of the requirements and of the scientific knowledge, the preparation of these CTD documentation virtually 28 times for the implementation of the same directive is not entirely satisfactory. Regarding impartiality, the text says regulatory decisions should be impartial. Well, this is totally normal. Regulatory decisions should be legitimate. All stakeholders should be treated equitably. Objectivity should increase confidence in regulatory system, no remark. About the consistency, domestic producers should be held to the same regulatory requirements as those that apply to importers and foreign manufacturers. Well, this should seem totally normal, but we have had an experience with the declaration procedure that was only accessible to domestic manufacturers, not accessible to importers. As we usually do, we had very extremely rich discussions. And on this particular situation, I am very confident that the situation will be solved very soon. Regulatory requirements and their application must be consistent and predictable over time, and when changes are necessary, clearly stipulated measures and transition periods should be established, and this is a way to facilitate the work on both sides, agency and companies. Now about the proportionality. Regulation should be adequate to the aim being pursued without being excessive. Adherence to a pre-specified monograph may be sufficient for an over-the-counter medicine. I thought this was very interesting to read. Well, I will address these two subjects later, together with points about effectiveness and efficiency of the regulation. Now, about the flexibility. The language of regulation should be descriptive and not prescriptive, and should allow for alternative approaches that achieve the same results. And here I would like to take the example of what is called now the atypical actives. We have recently faced a difficulty with the supply of the chemical stocks, particularly because our historical suppliers may not anymore supply chemical substances to us. Why? Because we are a pharmaceutical company, and because the chemicals in questions are not synthesized according to GMP procedures. They respond to HACCP or ISO norms, but not to GMP. Moreover, if they want to prepare chemical substances according to GMP destined to the pharmaceutical sector, they have to declare it on the website of the agency. So they don't want to do it. So they refuse to supply. So there we have seen that for this particular question, as an example of the flexibility, in some countries there have been accommodations that have been done according to alternative procedures that could be done with other sorts of auditing that are not described in the GMP referential, but risk assessments could be used, paper documentation could be provided to the agencies in order to show the equivalence between the GMP certification and other types of certifications. In Canada, there was also recently publication on the website on Health Canada with a explanation on exemption rules for 168 substances that were impossible to buy in a GMP certification system, and that were exempted from the GMP obligation, provided that a risk assessment, a complete risk assessment is provided. So this way of finding solutions in situations that would otherwise block the authorization of homeopathic medicinal products should be encouraged and developed in all regions where we have this kind of difficulty. I would like to speak about the effectiveness and efficiency, and effective regulations are those that achieve the intended goals, and efficient regulations are those that achieve the intended goals within reasonable time, effort, and costs. I propose to illustrate the efficiency of the different regulatory systems we have experienced in my company. And we have compared the review times between submission and granting of the authorization in 28 countries. The 28 countries include India and many European members, and North and South America countries as well, Morocco, Tunisia, and all the countries where we have made the applications. Well, the time between submission and granting is a very classical indicator, a very simple and classical indicator. We chose 3 products. We have 2 single homeopathic medicinal products we called A and B, and we have 1 branded, a fixed combination called C. We have submitted product A through the procedure of a new registration application, which is called also MA, or marketing authorization. Will an authorization, be it a registration or a marketing authorization? Well, in those different countries anyway, the names are very different. They may have very different names. The review duration varied from 1 day, well, in fact, it's 0 days because it's just a declaration, up to 7 years and a half. In 14 countries. We also submitted the product A according to the update, the famous review that we have to do with the products that were already on the market and had to go through a whole review procedure in order to integrate the directive requirements. And this was followed in 9 different countries, and the review periods varied from less than a month to 9 years and a half. So in total, A has been evaluated 20 times. Now the product B was submitted according to the update process in 9 countries, the same ones, and the review periods varied from less than a month to 9 years. We also submitted B through the procedures of a new registration applications in 13 countries, and the review periods varied from 1 day or 0 day in 2 countries. Again, this was the declaration system, up to 18 years and a half. And I think, well, this is an exception, of course. And I think that this last procedure is still ongoing, it's not even finished, but it has probably integrated the infinitesimal rule. In total, B has been evaluated 20 times as well. And the last product about the branded combination has been submitted in 18 countries. Again, 18 varied from 1 day for the declaration procedures to 6 years. And it has been entirely evaluated 17 times, because in one of the countries it was just a declaration, so there is no evaluation. So I would like to make some remarks about these data. First, it is not satisfactory on both sides, agencies and companies, to see that a documentation may stay 18 or even 7 or 9 years in an agency. How can we handle that? The original dossier has become obsolete. The agency will grant the registration certificate at the end eventually, based on what? On the commitment of the holder to comply with the current standards, with the updated standards. The agency might also ask for an updated complete documentation, which will only further delay the procedure. Well, the situation would not have been very different if the agency had granted the registration sooner. A revision is always possible post-authorization. Or, if resources are lacking in certain agencies, more flexible solutions should be considered. Moreover, generally, a number of 200 or 300 stocks is the minimum necessary for the commercial launch of a series of single homeopathic medicinal products. Well, in regions where the 3-year sunset clause applies and where it is usual that review times reach 4 or more years, it is virtually impossible to obtain 200 or 300 registration within the 3 years, so it is not at all possible to access to the market. Also, naturally, I propose that homeopathic medicinal products should be exempted from the sunset clause procedure. Well, the second remark is that I fully understand that each country needs to have control on the products marketed on its territory. However, it is not satisfactory to see how many times the same documentation has been evaluated. Nevertheless, I believe that we could learn in the future how to save time and resources on both sides, within agencies and within companies, and find solutions for a better efficiency of the procedure. And this forum is the exact time and place to imagine solutions. May I here quote the WHO draft text I mentioned earlier. At international level, duplication of regulatory evaluations of medical products create inefficiencies and additional costs. This is the total of the period of the evaluation time needed for the 3 products I was talking about. What are the solutions? First example, I believe it would be very interesting to use the CEP procedure of the EDQM. Well, I regret that we are not able to talk with Cathy Viel because we could have been talking about this. The CEP procedure is about the conformity of to the European Pharmacopoeia monograph. This was exactly created in order to save resources, in order to have one central evaluation of the active substance and not to do it a second time. I was surprised to read from the EDQM that was 4 years ago that it was not possible to make CEP procedure accessible to homeopathic stocks. Well, I believe it should become possible in the near future, and this will save much time and resources to both agencies and firms while guaranteeing compliance with the highest level of quality requirements. A second example, these are only examples. A second example, I would like to quote also the text regarding proportionality. Regulation should be adequate to the aim being pursued without being excessive, and adherence to a pre-specified monograph may be sufficient for an over-the-counter medicine. Well, we are going to have presentations about the pharmacopoeias later. I believe that the existing official homeopathic pharmacopoeias are excellent references. Compliance with official homeopathic pharmacopoeias should be sufficient for most homeopathic stocks and homeopathic preparations. In the countries where the declaration procedure is established, the authorities have clearly fixed a complete legal and regulatory framework, and a company cannot declare the commercialization of a product if it does not respect all the requirements laid down in the regulation. This solution is therefore particularly recommendable in the absence of any existing published rules for homeopathic medicinal products or for transitional periods until the rules are published. Thirdly, marketing authorization. Granted in a country could be recognized by another country. I mean automatically recognized. Of course, this could be achieved through bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements, and there it's not the infinitesimal rule, it's a little bit of the similarity principle that we can use here. Last point concerning efficiency is the experience that we have lived some years ago when we had to withdraw registrations.
could you try, Irene? Could you try and round up soon?
Yes,
the
it's
session?
finished. The experience we have lived some years ago, we had to withdraw registrations 5 years after their granting, after so much work, because it was time of their renewal, and because the branch of this particular region could not afford to pay the fees for the renewal, and these fees were in no way proportionate to the turnover of the product, so we had to withdraw half of the portfolio that we had obtained as registrations. And regarding transparency, I would just like to say that we would appreciate to find more easily the registration numbers of the products that were assessed, the assessment reports on all the websites of the agency. And my conclusion is that we would like to facilitate find the solutions that will avoid the continuation of duplication of submissions in the future. This will facilitate the development of homeopathy. An adequate balance should be reached between promoting uniformity of regulatory requirements in all regions and accommodating local regulatory frameworks. Instead, regulatory convergence should be encouraged at international level through exchange of information and international forums such as this one. As I will retire in the following year, this forum may well be the last opportunity for me to meet most of you, so I would like to say again how much I am grateful to all the persons who have contributed to the rich diversity of scientific and regulatory discussions and who have made this presentation possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Irene, for showing that it's a challenging environment for a globally operating company. So I'm going to very briefly introduce Günther Herr. He's Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs for Biologische Heilmittel Heil. And I think he was born in Germany and studied law in Germany and in Oxford in Britain. And I think with any kind of regulation, there is always a legal framework that hangs over it or that's associated with it. And so we're very pleased that we have someone with the expertise of Günther Herr here with us to share some of his perspectives with a particular emphasis on the legal angle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert, for this nice introduction, but thank you also very much for organizing or being hugely involved in the organization of this great event. The same applies as for Irene, applies for me. I've never had the opportunity to speak before such an audience. I'm honored and very grateful and would really like to thank you to everybody of you who has taken part in the organization. As you can see, my topic is the legislation of homeopathic medicinal products in the global perspective. What do I mean with global? I will not tackle any country in the world. I will tackle some main countries. However, of the main countries being active in homeopathic with medicinal products, I will not focus on India, because here in the audience we have all the experts there, and I think it would not be appropriate for me to add more. And also regarding the US, the situation is specific. There we have specific rules, and also we have the expert there, and the expert will also give us more insight in the course of today or tomorrow. So, but the other main countries I would like to address. When you speak about legislation, or when I speak about legislation, I do not mean automatically the legislation and the regulatory practice together, because these things are first of all separate. I mean, if the regulatory practice sometimes causes difficulties, and we also had procedures lasting for more than 7 years, you mentioned 9.5 years, that's not always written in the legislation. So, and the other way around, when when something is written in the legislation, it is hard for the regulatory authorities to move away, because they are bound to the legislation. And I think, therefore, it's worthwhile to look into the laws. I've basically 4 subjects. having a look into a definition of a homeopathic medicinal product, dealing with the general authorization requirement. I addressed the need for specific procedure and how it's solved in the legislation. And last but not least, I want to draw your attention to also a possibility which is not so often used in the practical, in the regulatory practice, but foreseen in the law, the so-called mixed marketing authorization. So let's start with the question, what is a homeopathic medicinal product? I can make that rather short.